believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men. That is genius. As arguably the most influential American author of the 1800s, Ralph Waldo Emerson has left a profound impact on this great country that we call home. Constantly questioning all that he has known to be true, Emerson was a unique thinker who changed the way that many Americans thought of religion. Through following methods similar to those of the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, Emerson took nothing for granted and sought his own truths in this world. This idea of self-determination was manifested in his 1841 classic, Self Reliance, which has since been the subject of countless pieces of scholarly work, including this documentary. Born on May 25, 1803 in Boston, Massachusetts, religion was destined to be the main focus of Emerson's life. As the son of a preacher and with a family line of New England ministers, he was in line to become a minister himself. This possibility was only increased when at the age of 8 his father passed away. Emerson's mother was determined to raise her sons to be successful ministers, so she reached out to her eccentric sister for help in preparing Emerson for Harvard. Graduating in 1821, Emerson's life showed no particular promise. After he drifted around for 4 years working as a schoolmaster in 9 different Boston area schools, Emerson returned to Harvard to study theology. This marked the beginning of a reinvention of his life that would change the course of modern religious studies. Starting a few years later, Emerson began preaching as a junior pastor for Boston's Unitarian Second Church. This new interpretation of Christianity focused on the idea that humans are not deprived of anything, began to allude to the idea that Jesus himself was not a divine being, and instead the highest expression of humanity. These ideas of human separation from God began to fester in Emerson's brain, and on February 8, 1829, his whole world fell apart. That night, his 19-year-old wife passed away from tuberculosis, and from that night on, Ralph Waldo Emerson questioned all that he had ever held true. In his immense depression, he took a 3-year personal hiatus to Europe. When he returned, he received financial compensation from his dead wife's family, allowing him to begin a career as a lecturer. 4 years later, Emerson published his first book, Nature. This writing became the unofficial manifesto for a group of his philosophically inclined friends that would become known as Transcendentalists. This semi-religious, semi-philosophical movement would become based on the idea that we as humans must determine for ourselves what we believe to be true about this world. This philosophy is perfectly summarized in Emerson's most famous piece of literature, Self Reliance. To begin the piece, Emerson provides a poem that perfectly portrays the transcendentalist way of thinking. Man is his own star, and the soul that can render an honest and a perfect man. The entire 18-page essay relates back to this idea that man needs nobody but himself in his quest to understand this world. There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide. One knows that something important has been stated when a man compares something so simple as imitating another man to taking his own life. You would think to yourself, this has to be the most meaningful line of the essay. However, Emerson keeps hitting the reader with these bombshells. Is it so bad to be misunderstood? Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood. This is the moment where Emerson conveys to the reader that one can only truly succeed if one is not seen as successful by others. One may only attain success after first being misunderstood and cast out as a lunatic. Otherwise, one's ideas must not truly be special. Later in the essay, Emerson coalesces these two ideas into a critique of religion in a whole by stating, "Man is timid and apologetic. He is no longer unright. He dares not say, 'I think,' 'I am,' but quotes some saint or sage." These type of passages are what makes Self-Reliance such a literary and philosophical revelation, as no other theologist had gone so far as to question the value of the words of the great religious figures. From this point on in the essay, Emerson begins to rally the troops with a sort of battle cry. He calls for a mob of individuals, one who instead of working together, works alone, as one can only truly reach enlightenment through one's own thoughts and actions. This mob seems to form a wave, and as he puts it, society is a wave. The waves move onward, but the water of which it is composed of does not. The same particle does not rise from the valley to the ridge. Its unity is only phenomenal. The persons who make up a nation today, next year die, and their experience with them. This metaphor near the end of this masterpiece seemingly reminds the reader that this quest for knowledge will most likely have no personal benefit. One's ideas will not become accepted until one is already passed. In the conclusion, Emerson's purpose seems very pure in its intent. All he seeks to do is spread his truth, then one must rely on oneself through the entirety of their lifetime. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
When we say a man who most students have never heard of is the most influential author of the 1800s, you might not believe us. However, our beliefs are not single to us. Take Khabib's word into consideration. George Kateb, Emeritus Professor of Politics at Princeton University. And if you're like me and have no clue what emeritus means, rest assured, I looked it up. Emeritus, defined as a college professor having retired, but allowed to retain their title as an honor. Professor Kateb, in his critique of self-reliance, he breaks down the idea of self-reliance into a twofold, those two being a mental self-reliance and an active self-reliance. He justifies this by stating that Emerson tends to elevate intellectual independence above independence of character and practical achievements. This meaning mental self-reliance is thinking one's thoughts and thinking them through in modes of perception is the model of active self-reliance. That acting self-reliantly is analogous to thinking self-reliantly. Now, Kateb comes to this conclusion by further stating that the link comes from the idea that thinking is close to prayer, is like prayer, though in a secular sense. In his conclusion, Kateb goes on to compare Emerson as an American Shakespeare. You know, that guy everyone talks about when they try to act like an intellect. Anyways, in his own piece, Emerson talks of Shakespeare, saying that Shakespeare will never be made by the study of Shakespeare. Emerson's statement brings up very individualistic views, which are the center of his self-reliance essay, while Kateb's comparison of Emerson and Shakespeare gives credit to the transcendentalist movement that Emerson headed.